You know, it's crazy to think about, right? Like how recently, relatively speaking, we were basically just apes.
Hmm.
And now, look at us. We're building AI. We're sending probes all over the solar system.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild ride.
It is. It really is. And that incredible journey, the one that took us from, well, basically swinging from the trees to, pondering the universe. That's what we're going to be digging into in this deep dive.
It is, and we'll be doing it with a pretty amazing guide, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari.
Exactly. And this book, Sapiens, it covers so much ground. It takes us from the Big Bang all the way to the present day. Harari talks about these massive turning points in human history. The cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution.
It's a lot to process, definitely.
It is. And so for you, the listener, we really want to extract, to pull out the key insights from Sapiens, the stuff that really makes you think.
Yeah, we're going to focus on what makes us, Homo sapiens, different. How did we end up running the show? And we'll be highlighting some of the most surprising, some of the most thought-provoking things Harari talks about.
It's your crash course, You haven't had time to read the book? We've got you covered.
Exactly.
All right, so let's jump right in. Let's start with what Harari calls the cognitive revolution. This seems like kind of the moment where things really take off for us as a species.
Yeah, it's a turning point for sure. About 70,000 years ago, something really interesting, something big happened in the brains of Homo sapiens.
Okay.
This cognitive revolution, it gave us complex language, of course. But maybe even more important than that, it gave us the ability to believe in, to share what he calls fictions or imagined realities.
Fictions? You mean like myths and stories?
Kind of, yeah, but it goes way beyond that. Think about this. Gods, nations, money, human rights, laws, even the idea of justice, These are all ideas that exist only because, as a group, we agree that they exist.
Right. You can't, dissect a brain and find, like, a nation gene or a money molecule.
Exactly. So how does this, how does believing in these collective fictions, how does that actually play out in the real world? How does it give us an advantage?
Yeah, how does it matter?
Okay, so Harari uses a really interesting example. He talks about the Peugeot car company.
Okay.
Millions of people around the world, they believe in Peugeot, they buy their cars, they trust them. Maybe they even feel some kind of connection to the brand. But when you really break it down, Peugeot isn't a thing, like a rock or a tree. It's just a company. It's a story that people have decided to believe in.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
So how did this whole thing about shared imaginary worlds, how did that give us an edge over other humans that were around back then, like Neanderthals?
Right. Well, so Neanderthals, they were smart. They were resourceful. But they probably didn't have this ability to create these really complex stories, these narratives. They could communicate about danger, hey, there's a lion over there. But could they create a whole system of beliefs about, ancestral spirits? Or an afterlife? Probably not. And that would have limited them, right? You can only build a group so big based on personal connections and what you can see right in front of you.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to unite a ton of people if you can't share, if you can't spread these bigger ideas.
Right, exactly. And this ability to believe in shared stories, it allowed us to create really adaptable social structures.
Yeah.
So Harari talks about these examples like childless elites. You have, Catholic priests, Buddhist monks, even the Chinese eunuch bureaucracies. Biologically, it doesn't make sense, right? They're not passing on their genes.
Right.
But their existence, it's maintained by these shared stories, by these beliefs that are bigger than just biology. A chimpanzee, alpha male, his behavior. It's basically all about maximizing his reproductive success.
So these stories, they can override, even some of our strongest biological instincts.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff. And it led to some really big things for sapiens, like massive cooperation, the ability to quickly change our societies. Harari gives this example of someone born in Berlin in 1900, let's say they lived a full 100 years, they would have lived through 5 completely different political systems. The Hohenzollern Empire, the Weimar Republic, Nazi Germany, Communist East Germany, and then finally, unified democratic Germany.
Well, all without their DNA changing at all.
Right. That kind of rapid change, it only happens because of these shared fictions that we create and believe in.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
It is.
So we've got these incredible brains, right? This ability to think abstractly, to believe in shared stories. But there's got to be some downsides to that, right? Like some costs.
Oh, for sure. Harari gets into this. He talks about how much energy our brains use. So for your average mammal, like 60 kilograms, their brain is about 200 cubic centimeters.
Okay.
Early humans, about 2.5 million years ago, they had brains around 600 cubic centimeters. And then modern Homo sapiens, we average like 1,200 to 1,400. Interestingly, Neanderthals, they actually had slightly bigger brains than us.
Really? So bigger brain equals smarter. Right.
It's not that simple. But bigger brain definitely equals more energy needed.
Yeah, makes sense.
And one theory that Harari discusses is that cooking food, which actually started before the cognitive revolution, that might have played a big role. Right. See, cooking makes food easier to digest, so you need less energy for digestion, which maybe freed up energy for our brains to grow.
So fire, it wasn't just for warmth and, scaring away predators.
Right.
It might have been a key part of us becoming, us.
Exactly. And it's a really interesting idea, right?
Okay.
Now let's talk about social hierarchies. There's this archaeological site in Sungir, Russia. It's about 30,000 years old. And they found this really elaborate burial site.
Okay.
Where this one guy, he was like 50 years old, he was buried with all these mammoth ivory beads and fox teeth. Way more than anyone else buried there.
Oh, wow.
So it looks like social hierarchies they were already developing back then, even among hunter-gatherers.
That's earlier than I would have thought.
Yeah. We don't know everything about how these ancient foragers lived, what they believed, their political systems, that kind of stuff. But it's clear that they were more complex than we often give them credit for. Like Harari says, we shouldn't underestimate what was going on in those 60,000 years between the cognitive revolution and the agricultural revolution.
Right. Okay, so let's move forward a bit in the timeline. We've got these smart humans, they're living in more complex social groups, and then bam, the agricultural revolution hits around 12,000 years ago. We start domesticating plants and animals. Wheat, rice, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens.
Yeah.
And at first you think, well, this is great, right? More food, more resources.
Yeah, that was the traditional view, progress, right? More food equals more people, bigger settlements. But Harari, he challenges that view in Sapiens.
He does.
He says, well, maybe for individual humans and individual animals, the agricultural revolution wasn't such a great deal. Maybe it was even a step backward.
Really? How so?
So take wheat. From an evolutionary perspective, wheat has been incredibly successful.
It's everywhere, right?
Exactly. But think about a single wheat plant in a field. It can't survive on its own anymore. It's completely dependent on humans. Same with domesticated animals. Think about a calf raised for veal stuck in a tiny crate. Compare that to, a rhinoceros roaming free. Yeah, there aren't as many rhinos. But which life is better? Evolutionary success in terms of how many copies of your genes you spread, it doesn't always mean a good life for the individual.
Right. So we might have more food overall, but the lives of a lot of individuals, a lot of animals, it got a lot worse.
Exactly. And the agricultural revolution, it led to these bigger settlements like Jericho, Saloyuk, and eventually to empires, the Akkadian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Chinese Empire.
All these empires.
Right. And this was possible because of surplus food, which led to larger populations, specialization of labor, but it also meant you needed more organization, more complex social structures, and most importantly, you needed stronger, more elaborate shared beliefs. Those imagined orders we talked about earlier.
So these imagined orders, things like laws, hierarchies, they became even more important to hold these big societies together.
Exactly. They're not objectively true, but they allowed huge numbers of people to cooperate. I mean, think about the American Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Harari points out, biologically speaking, that's not really true.
Right.
But it's a powerful idea that helped create a nation.
But these hierarchies, they also created inequality, didn't they? Like Sapiens talks about.
Yeah, for sure. Even if they're not based in biology, these hierarchies based on race, caste, class, they can get really entrenched, really powerful. They can lead to huge disparities.
Right. Sapiens gives that example of racial beliefs in Alabama, right?
Right. Even in a place where, there's some economic mobility, these ideas about race, they persist.
Yeah.
And they have real consequences.
It's amazing how much these made-up beliefs have shaped us,
It is. It's really something.
So another big fiction that changed everything, money.
Yeah, money, another super effective imagined reality. And it enabled cooperation and trade on this massive global scale. It's really a system of trust. Think about how money evolved. Early on, people used things with actual value. Like Sapiens talks about how the Sumerians used barley.
Right, because you could always eat the barley if you needed to.
Exactly. But modern money, like a dollar bill, has no intrinsic value. It's just paper. Or even just a number in a computer.
Right.
It only has power because we all agree that it does. We believe in the institutions behind it, the government, the banks.
You even see, like, in God we trust on some money.
Right. It's all about faith, ultimately. And Harari talks about how these transnational monetary zones started to pop up, like standardized gold and silver coins. And that really laid the foundation for a global economy, global politics. Like in the 16th century, you had trade happening between Europe and East Asia using these coins.
Wow.
And all this gold and silver flowing from the Americas, it fueled this global exchange. Even Chinese merchants trading silk and porcelain, they were getting in on the action.
It's incredible how this belief in something that's essentially made up could have such a huge impact, connecting the whole world.
It is.
So let's talk about empires. They pop up a lot in history. What's their role in the story that Sapiens is telling?
Well, empires, they were really good at spreading ideas, spreading culture. And they often justified their conquest by saying they were bringing something better to the conquered people. The Chinese had the mandate of heaven. The Romans had their idea of civilization. The British had their whole thing about spreading liberalism and free trade.
It's always for the benefit of the conquered people, right? Even though it's often really about power and resources, as Sapiens makes clear.
Yeah, that's a good point. But Harari also says that the flow of ideas, it wasn't just one way. You had this mixing of cultures, this cultural syncretism. Like the Romans, they adopted a lot from the Greeks. The Abbasid Caliphate, they were influenced by Persian culture. The Mughal Empire in India, they blended Persian and Indian traditions. And even today, you see this in America.
Melting pot.
Exactly. But of course, Sapiens points out that for the people being conquered, this could be really tough. They might lose their traditions, their way of life. And the European overseas empires, they were unique. They were conquering places across huge oceans. That was different from most empires, which tended to expand over land.
Yeah, it totally changed the scale of things.
It did.
Okay, let's talk about religion now, another powerful force in human history. How did our beliefs about the supernatural change over time?
So Harari talks about how you start with these animistic beliefs where there are spirits everywhere in nature. Okay. And then you get polytheism with all these gods and goddesses. And interestingly, he points out that polytheism, it kind of elevates the status of humans.
It does.
Yeah, because our actions, like our prayers, sacrifices, even our sins, they can influence these gods. And that means we can influence the whole natural order. Like if there's a flood, it might be because a god is angry, and that flood affects everything, not just humans.
So in a polytheistic world, humans are kind of like bigger players in the cosmic scheme of things compared to animism.
Exactly. And usually you have a supreme god, but they're kind of distant. And then you have all these lesser gods who deal with specific things like love or war or the harvest.
Right.
Then you get the rise of monotheism. But Harari says it's not like monotheism just wipes out everything that came before. You often see monotheistic religions that still have elements of polytheism, dualism, even animism. Like you have the devil, right? And saints, they're kind of like the lesser gods of polytheism. And some people still believe in ghosts, which is like animism.
So it's more like a blending of different ideas.
Yeah, it's messy, And then you also have these natural law religions like Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. They focus on ethics and natural laws, not so much on gods.
Right, right.
And you could even say that humanism, the idea that humans are special and have this inherent value, that's kind of like a modern natural law religion.
That's interesting. It seems like humans have tried a lot of different ways to make sense of the world.
They have. And then around the 16th century, you have this really big shift, the scientific revolution.
Okay, and what makes this so revolutionary?
Well, it starts in Western Europe around 1500. And what's different is this idea of admitting ignorance. They have this phrase in Latin, ignoramus. It means we don't know.
You'd think that admitting you don't know stuff would be like the opposite of scientific progress?
Right, but it's not. See, by acknowledging that they didn't know everything, scientists opened themselves up to learning, to being wrong. No idea was too sacred to be challenged. This was totally different from a lot of traditional beliefs, like, the story of the Tower of Babel or the myth of Icarus, where people get punished for trying to know too much.
Right.
So this humility, this willingness to say we don't know, it became a huge driving force for gaining knowledge. And as science solved problems, people started to think, hey, maybe we can solve all our problems with science. Maybe poverty, disease, war, even death itself. Maybe these are inevitable. Maybe they're just problems we haven't figured out how to solve yet.
So there's this sense of like unlimited potential.
Exactly. And Harari uses this great example, Benjamin Franklin and lightning.
Oh, yeah.
So before, people saw lightning as like divine punishment. But Franklin, he's like, no, this is a natural phenomenon. We can study it, understand it, even control it. And that's how he invented the lightning rod. He demystified this powerful force of nature.
And this new power, this ability to understand and control nature, it kind of created this feedback loop, didn't it?
Yeah, totally. You had scientific discoveries leading to new technologies, and those technologies gave political and economic powers more resources, and those resources were then used to fund more science. It was this self-perpetuating cycle. Like, take nuclear physics. It started with scientists just trying to understand how the universe works, but then it led to nuclear power and nuclear weapons.
So science gets tied up with politics, with economics.
Big time. And this was also a time of huge scientific expeditions. You know, Captain James Cook sailing around the world.
Right.
And all these blank spaces on the maps, they were like this siren song for European explorers and eventually for European conquerors, you know, wanting to discover new lands, claim them for their empires.
So the thirst for knowledge went hand in hand with imperialism.
Absolutely. And alongside the scientific revolution, you have the rise of capitalism.
Okay, and how does capitalism fit into all of this?
Well, capitalism, it was all about progress, about investing money to make more money. And it relied heavily on scientific breakthroughs to create new products, new ways of doing things. Harari uses this example of Fritz Haber, who figured out how to synthesize ammonia from nitrogen in the air. This was during World War I, and Germany needed nitrates for fertilizer and explosives.
Oh.
And Haber's discovery basically saved them. It shows how important science was for these economic and political systems.
Right. And capitalism, it also relies on credit, on trust in the future.
Yes, totally. The idea is you invest money now, believing that you'll make more money later. But Harari talks about this thing called the Mississippi Bubble, which shows how dangerous that can be. People were investing in this company that it was all based on hype, not on anything real.
So it's kind of like a 18th century tech bubble.
Exactly. It all came crashing down. And while capitalism has created a lot of wealth, a lot of material progress, Harari also points out the downsides. Exploitation, inequality, putting profit before people. He gives those examples of the British East India Company and the Dutch VOC, which were basically these giant corporations that did some really bad things in their pursuit of profit. Right. It's a mixed bag, Progress doesn't always mean things are getting better for everyone.
That's a good point. But the scientific revolution and capitalism, they did seem to have a positive impact on some of humanity's biggest problems, right? Famine, plague, war.
Yeah, for sure. Like industrialization, new technologies in agriculture, they led to way more food being produced, and that meant fewer famines, plus better sanitation, hygiene, medicine. All that led to a huge decline in diseases like the plague.
Right.
And incredibly, since World War II, we've seen this dramatic decrease in violence between countries, and a lot of empires have collapsed peacefully.
It's like we're living in this unprecedented era of peace, at least on a global scale.
We are. But Harari warns us, there's still a lot of violence within countries, and this peace, it might not last. There's no guarantee.
That's a sobering thought. So we've become so powerful, we live longer, healthier lives. But has all this progress made us happier? That's the big question, right?
It is. And Harari argues that happiness, it's not just about how much stuff you have,
Yeah.
It's about your expectations, your sense of meaning. And he worries that all this media, all this advertising, it's raising our expectations so high that we're never satisfied.
Right. We're always chasing after this perfect life that doesn't exist.
Exactly. We have more than ever before, but we're not necessarily happier. So where are we heading? Is it all just about getting more and more powerful?
And with all this power comes the potential to change ourselves in really dramatic ways, right? Like with bioengineering, nanotechnology.
Exactly. People are talking about immortality, extending life indefinitely, maybe even uploading our minds into computers.
Wow.
It's wild stuff. We could be on the verge of becoming like gods, but do we have the wisdom, the ethics to handle that kind of power? It's kind of scary,
It is, yeah. So to wrap up our deep dive into Sapiens, we've seen how our ability to create and believe in these shared stories, It's what really set us apart. It's what allowed us to conquer the planet. We talked about the good and the bad of the agricultural revolution, about how money and religion shaped us, and about the incredible changes brought about by the scientific revolution and capitalism. And ultimately, Sapiens leaves us with these really big questions about what progress really means, and whether we're actually getting any happier.
And Harari wants us to remember, this wasn't inevitable. Things could have gone differently. Understanding how we got here, it helps us see that we have choices. We can choose what kind of future we want.
So listener, here's something to think about. We have all this power now. What are we going to do with it? What kind of world are we going to create? That's the challenge Sapiens throws down.
Yeah, it's a challenge for all of us.
If you haven't read Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, we highly recommend it. It's a really mind-expanding book, and it'll make you look at the world in a whole new way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little bit unsettling. It's a wild ride, this whole human story. And we're only just getting started, really.
Yeah, who knows what the next chapter holds.
Exactly. All right, until next time.
See you later.